This video is sponsored by Jack Factory. If you need protein, pre-workout, or creatine, any one of those three fundamentals, links are in the description. I highly recommend it, and of course, it helps support the channel. Without further ado, Ashton Rouska. Ashton?
Johnny?
Okay, it's not every day that I have the best powerlifter on the planet in the drug-tested division, which we will get to some questions about that, some comments that you very often get. But before we get to that, I want to ask you the basics. It's not every day that we have literally the best lifter in the entire world in what I'm trying to do. So first of all, what is your training split? Just across weeks.
So currently I work in 4-week block periods, and it really depends sort of functionally on which meet I choose to do. Some meets I join in a bit more spontaneously. Some are very planned out, like Raw Nationals. So for prepping, say, for 16 weeks, it's going to be split up into four-week blocks leading up into the meet, roughly. And each block will sort of have its own function, purpose, and piece leading up to that. Yeah.
So then within those blocks, what's the training frequency per lift? So let's say, how often are you squatting, how often are you benching, and how often are you deadlifting? So let's just imagine just 1 week. Like, what are the days? Just for someone from the outside looking in who has just no idea how you train.
Yeah. So the fast and dirty answer is it depends. It depends on sort of how busy and hectic my lifestyle is outside of the training environment. Ideally, in an ideal world, I'd like to train 4 days a week. So 2 of those days I'll squat, 2 of those days I'll deadlift. Usually the deadlift I'll split up into sumo and conventional. It's very, very, very rare that I would train both, that I would train 1-2 times a week, ever. And then I would usually like to bench 3 to 4 days a week. But since I had strained my pec before the Arnold in 2019, I've reduced that to usually 2 to 3 days per week. But now as I'm healthy again, we're increasing that frequency back to 3 to 4 range.
Okay, so when you say you conventional and sumo within the same week, so you do that regardless of if you compete with sumo or conventional. And for people who don't know, by the way, you compete with both styles. You kind of alternate. So like what would you say on, let's say you're focusing on conventional, what would a sample of just a sumo sets times reps scheme be on that off day? Because let's say you're going light. Are you going light and fairly low volume, or are you going light and high volume and then heavy and moderate volume on the competition lift?
Right. Sumo, I don't actually ever do anything above sets of 3.
Really?
Yeah, ever. So it'll usually look like 3 sets of 3, and let's say we're in a 4-week block leading up to the meet, or 2 blocks out. Sumo would probably look something like 3 sets of 3 with like 630 pounds or something like that. And then there's usually a top single too, sumo, that I would do on that secondary day. But that sumo RPE is sort of it's almost like a recommendation, but it's what you can. It's a threshold, I should say, actually, that you should not pass no matter what, and it's actually probably just best to undershoot that.
Yeah,
always.
Like an RP cap, like
yeah.
Like the theme of a video recently that someone did, but had to work that in. But
exactly.
So you're saying you do a sumo single even on your secondary day,
correct?
Right. So in that case, are you doing 2 deadlift singles within that week?
Typically.
Okay.
Yes.
So you do a conventional single and heavier work, and then also sumo single, and then 3x3.
That's correct.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yep. And then again, in the sumo single, so the weight actually might be really close to, if not, there have been a couple of rare instances where it's actually higher than the conventional day, despite the conventional being on the primary day. But that's just because I think my true sumo max is probably higher than my conventional max. I've done 870 in training before.
Personal record.
Let's go, easy weight. Come on, let's go.
Get out. There we go.
Mama, there goes that man.
So I'm definitely able to, even at a lower RPE, I'm able to still push a lot more weight on sumo typically.
Yeah, that's very interesting that the 3x3 format is very interesting, because I would say, at least what I would assume otherwise would be a primary heavy day and then like a 2x8 like hypertrophy day if going with the opposite movement. So you find that heavy sumo work translates well to like heavy conventional work and vice versa, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Both, it goes, for me, in my, experience, it's gone both ways for sure. Sumo always looks really, I've noticed this in my training, sumo always looks really good after a really good, conventional cycle. And, I can also say the same for the opposite.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, so this connects back to something that, when people are watching this, always one of the things that people debate about is at what level do certain variables just completely shift because of how strong you are, how much weight you're moving. And something I want to ask is, as you started, what programs, if any, did you run? Like when you were just starting out, young Ashton, for those who don't know, you deadlifted you deadlifted basically 700 pounds, 317.5 kilos at what age? Like 18?
17. 17,
yeah. So at that age, let's say 15 to 17, when I would imagine you probably put 100 plus pounds on your deadlift, what program were you running right then?
I actually strictly used percentage-based training back then.
Like, was it a publicly available program, or was it by a coach already back then?
No, it was by a coach. So when I hit moved to San Antonio after 10th grade. So when I was 16 years old, that's when I started getting trained by Gene Bell. Up until I hit 18 years old and I started college. But yeah, during the time I was working with Gene, no, it's not a publicly available program, although it uses... It's linear progression and usually lasts 8 to 10 weeks, and you increase percentage over time, decrease reps.
So when you transitioned away from that to then your own training at 18 to 23, what did you do differently?
The progression of training was actually very similar for those first 2 years. Even when I actually won the 2017 Raw Nationals and the 205 Open, I actually did like an 8-week, percentage-based program, and just that led right into that and beautifully peaked for it, and it worked out great. I mean, but after that, then I started sort of experimenting with RPE for a while and everything else like that. And once I hit 2018 Nationals, that was where there was sort of a major shift in my training, and I began to think and wonder, well, I already have a lot of muscle mass. Can I spend more time hitting heavier weight and more singles? And do I really need to hit as much, volume, basically?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of like a point that I got to, because I'm like, I'm already filling out 205, and if I'm competing in this weight class, at the time that was my thinking, I don't really necessarily need to build more muscle, I guess. I mean, I'm already 205 and I'm like under 10% body fat. What's going to happen if I just lift heavier more often? And, so I experimented with that for a little while, a little risky. So what I did in the beginning was I pushed myself as hard as I could for as long as I could, right until I would reach near like a breaking point. Again, very risky. I don't recommend it to really, most people or anyone really, like I have an entirely different sort of philosophy now, but then, I wanted to see how far I could go before I would basically break down, literally.
Yeah.
And I would measure that, objectively, and I could see how long I could last in certain intensity ranges. And I got a lot of valuable data from that, though.
So extending off of that, when did you make the decision that you need a coach? And can you just explain how someone like yourself, it's really obviously working. You were already winning nationals meets. You were already the best, arguably, lifter of your generation at that, age range. What made you think that, okay, now I need a coach? Was there a specific moment, or was it a trend that you were noticing? Was it problem oriented, or just like, hey, this would be cool to try?
It's a little bit of both, actually. So the problem was, I'm in graduate school, I'm in the military, I have a lot of obligations, a lot of duties, and it takes up a lot of time, and it's not getting any easier. And so, one, I just wanted to be able to take off of myself, at least, as much, outside external stress as I possibly could. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is, I thought it would be cool. I wanted to learn more, actually. I felt like in my many years of lifting prior to that I've learned a lot. But I've also realized overall that time, meeting guys and watching, your videos, meeting guys like Sean, meeting guys like Christian, and many other lifters, that I know very little, and there's a lot to learn from a lot of other people. And Marcellus was someone that I've watched over the past few years, and I really liked his work. I liked how he approached his clients, and I really appreciated and admired a lot of the techniques and strategies that he used. So I was very open and willing to learn from him.
How did you immediately have that humility of like, I may be so much stronger than someone like myself, but it's like if I say something, you'd still listen if you believed it had a good point? Like, were you just always like that?
Yes, absolutely. Just because I am stronger than most people, I don't see myself as when it comes especially to training, I don't see myself as intellectually superior when it comes to training, lifting, exercise science, because one, that's just not like my field. Like, sure, I have many years of experience and I have a lot of knowledge and wisdom, but at the same time, I don't have the same foundational knowledge and expertise and experience that someone like Marcellus has. So in my eyes, I have a lot to learn from people like him, and so I'm very open to that.
So now I want to quickly get to accessories before we get to the juicy stuff. So we haven't even gotten out of phase one here. So as far as your accessories, what are the most effective accessories per each lift of the big three?
In my experience, there's a specific movement that I've really liked. It's a machine movement, but it has pretty good mobility on it. It's not as rigid as a leg press. It's called a squat press.
Really? Yes.
That has been phenomenal for my squat training. I've noticed in the last, 3 blocks, my squat has really been blowing up lately. And that's also like around the time I started squat pressing, like really heavy, like 1,000, 1,200 plus pounds heavy.
Can I just ask quickly, what sets and reps would you typically do on that?
So I'll usually do ascending sets of, it depends on what the block, 10 to 12 reps.
10 to 12 reps, how many sets, let's say? Like you're doing like 5 sets, like 5 by 10 to 12?
Yeah, there's usually 4 working sets, but I'll usually do 4 or 5 sets leading into that as well. And I'll usually start around...
Leading into that? So
yes.
You're talking maybe up to like nearly 10, like 8 to 10 sets?
About 8.
Okay. See, I think that's really important because
it's extra workload, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it's like 400 or 500 pounds, it's still like a lot of extra work. And especially after you squat really heavy.
So for the squat, what's your best barbell accessory, by the way, just real quickly?
Okay. Well, technically, I compete with low bar squat typically, so high bar squat I would consider as my...
So high bar squat and squat press.
Get up! Come on, let's go! Get up! Get up! Good. Hey, let's go! Good. Come on. There you go.
Yeah, so leading into the bench press, what was the most effective accessory for you there?
Close grip.
So for that,
close grip and close grip incline press.
So let's say for the deadlift, what's your best secondary with the barbell and then more distance accessory?
Okay. This actually might sound a little funny. I actually don't really do secondary barbell movements for deadlift. I either do conventional or some. I don't really do RDLs. I don't really do...
no snatch grip or stiff leg deadlift, deficit?
No, none of that. I've done deficit before. I did like it, but I mean, for me, it didn't really... I didn't really notice the greater significant difference. Maybe it was the way I implemented it. I would be open to trying it again, but at the time I did it, it wasn't really effective.
So do you do some distant work?
Sorry?
Like, do you do some distant accessory, like a hamstring curl or anything like that? So
yes, hamstring curl.
Okay.
Plate-loaded hamstring curl I prefer. Okay. That one is really good. I like that one for squat too, but especially for deadlift.
What are the least effective accessories that you felt like you really spun your wheels on, and then you finally just figured out, like, I just shouldn't even do that? You kind of alluded to it a little bit on the deadlift as far as some things maybe not being worth it. But let's start with the squat. Was there any accessory that you kind of tried to fit and it just didn't really fit, and the moment you just dropped it, things got better?
Yeah, leg press. So leg press was, one, I didn't really like the movement. I didn't like the range of motion on it. It was a bit too rigid for me. So I don't do it.
Yeah, and then for the bench press, what was a lift where maybe you were playing around with, in the moment you just gave it up, things got better?
wide grip bench press.
Like
like a little bit more than max grip. It didn't really do anything.
All right, so now let's get to the second part of this interview. This is where we're going to get a little bit dicier, a little bit edgier. So significant percentage of my audience doesn't believe you're natural. Just flat out thinks you're a liar. Even some people, well, I'm sure you've seen comments all the time where people go, hey, I respect him, he's really strong, he seems like a good guy, but then they fully assume you're a liar still, which is, seems like a very big contradiction. What would you say to someone who doesn't think you're natural? What would you just say to make them relate to your position and maybe convince them? But then secondly, also, what does it feel like to have so many people believe you're a cheater within your own community? Just on an emotional level, what does that feel like?
What I would say to them, I've tried saying a lot of things to them over the years. And at this, I've come to a point, honestly, where I don't feel like I have to say much to them because the evidence is out there. I have a history of being tested out of meets for, years now. 2 more years of competing, and it'll be a decade.
Yeah.
And I've never failed a single test. I've never had an incident.
This is the part of the interview where I should have pushed back harder. Nothing Ashton said was wrong, but obviously there are a lot of issues with drug testing, and we both wanted to address all of it. So we did a full second Skype interview in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we got Ashton back on to add a few more tidbits to this to go a little bit deeper, like I mentioned. So for those at home who they've seen Icarus, they've seen Clarence Kennedy's recent video against the idea of anti-doping. And a lot of people have similar thoughts that, hey, you've been drug tested, but a lot of people have. They've beaten drug tests, and it just doesn't really matter.
In 2011, an anonymous survey asked more than 1,200 athletes whether they'd used performance-enhancing drugs. The result, which was kept quiet for 6 years, was astonishing. 44% admitted to doping. But typically, only 1 to 2% of samples test positive.
You're not saying every single person who's drug tested is drug-free. And because you're in that group, you are solidified just due to that alone, right?
Correct. And that actually that goes a lot into my second and third point, some of the things you said there. So my second point being the doping failures of especially some high-level lifters. Now, while that's, not particularly common, like in our federation like USAPL, it does happen sometimes. Yeah. And there are some people, historically speaking, and this is a fact, that have, tried to cheat the system. And some people, we don't know how long they were, effectively doing it, but people got caught and they got busted for it. I think that is something, yes, that we have to address and be objective about.
I guess what people do hate is when people lie, right? Yeah. And when they come into the drug tested and they're taking shit, they try
now it's a different
everybody.
Culture. It's it's not drug tested. You're supposed to be drug free, which there's a big difference from that to the old days. Because I was guilty of that in the old days.
Yeah, drug tested, man. Yeah, drug tested back then.
It's like everyone was jacked and just trying to pass a test. Nowadays, it's more drug-free.
People also need to understand this as well at this point. But I would say before 2016, from the year late 90s, early 2000s, all the way up to about 2014, 2015, there weren't a lot of, compared to now at least, there weren't a lot of necessarily heavy hitters, I think, in terms of human potential. So this kind of also goes into my third point. But basically what I think happened is that there were a lot of lifters that were performing within a certain range. They had a certain ability for those, 15 years or so. And a lot of people began to, it started to solidify this perception of potential. And in this time frame, we also saw, mentioned earlier, some of the doping failures of high-level lifters. So if you consider both of those things, one, the doping failures, and two, just the sort of cap that people have placed, I think, on human performance from that era, I think that you start to get this this availability bias that occurs, and it's basically just like this mental shortcut that people use where things or cases that are readily available to them will kind of stand out. It'll be more salient compared to other things.
A perfect example of this is a video by Greg Doucette. In it, he debates alpha destiny and says that a 345-pound bench press is an unrealistic goal for a natural 181-pound lifter.
181 pounds, elite standard in the bench is 345 pounds with pause. And I wrote Will Tennyson, who's a Gymshark sponsored athlete. How much can he bench? I hit 335 in that video, I think. And Alpha Destiny's saying, well, most people in elite level genetics, they could hit those numbers. Yet Will Tennyson did.
What he's saying is most people shouldn't even aim for this goal because of just 2 examples that he gives. That's it. And this is the epitome of the availability bias, as Ashton so eloquently explained. You just use what is right there, and that becomes the standard for everyone. What if he said 280 pounds? What if he said 380 pounds? What if he said 405 pounds? It's just a horrible argument. To be clear, I have nothing against Greg personally, other than the fact that his voice is annoying as fuck. His second example is his brother, who's also immediately available to him.
His best bench press ever was 350 pounds. He was 180 pounds. So 5 pounds over the standard for elite. Steve would have some of the best genetics in the world to do the bench press.
This is absolutely not true. If you look at 24 to 34-year-old male powerlifters in 2020, this bench press would put him in the top 16%. That's 1 in 6. He's also trained for 10 plus years, so you can't compare him to regular gym goers who haven't had a chance to see where their genetics take them. If you're the best 1 in 6 basketball player at any given local competition, you would never say, I have some of the best genetics for basketball in the world. It's some of the best genetics in the YMCA. Yeah, and I think the tough thing, and I think this has to do with regions a lot too, would you agree? That if you're from Texas, especially in a football-heavy area, your perception of human potential is going to be drastically different than if you're from Canada in a town where maybe it's not as population dense, where there's a few athletes, maybe a few lacrosse or hockey players or whatever those weirdos do, versus if you're in a city like, let's say, Houston, where that is a top 5, most populated city. Texas, we would say, right, has probably the best football state in the world, realistically. So as far as genetic potential for those types of power and strength sports, it's probably the highest ever in Texas. And there's just more lifters in high school Texas than all of the USAPL I've heard in that federation, right?
Yeah, and I competed for a couple of years, or a year in THSPA actually, and when I was a junior in high school. And I will say that there are a lot of phenomenal lifters and strength athletes that I have seen come through that particular federation that have just never gone on to really, do federations like the USAPL or even USPA or, what have you. So that kind of goes back to my point, though, that I think that this sort of cap that we put on human potential. So if you think about, okay, we'll go ahead and go into my third point. So that's talking about sort of human potential and how much of it have we actually witnessed in we'll for now just talk about drug tested powerlifting.
Yeah, let's just make it as personal.
Right.
Yeah.
To make it simple. So like I said, during 2000 to 2015-ish, I'm not exactly sure which specific year raw lifting started, but the numbers that people were putting up then competing are a lot different than the high caliber lifters are putting up now. I mean, just miles apart in terms of ability, strength on just every single lift. I mean, you see men under 200 pounds benching 500 pounds, which is something you very, very, very almost like never saw in raw powerlifting beforehand, in drug tested powerlifting at least. Extremely rare. In the last few years, we've started to see that more. And there's other examples too, like we've seen a lot more mid-high 700, 800 deadlifts. We've seen more 700 plus squats in weight classes that wouldn't usually have, lifters doing that much weight. I mean, the world record just a few years ago was like 661 for the 205 weight class. Yeah. And now it's significantly higher than that. And I think that if we think about human potential on a bell curve, normal distribution, basically it's a distribution where think about all of the raw scores. Each raw score is like a single person. Yeah. And the distribution is shaped like a bell. and towards the tip of the bell is where usually the middle, the mean, average, person or score will lie. And the top of the bell is taller than the edges because a lot more of the scores will tend to cluster closer towards the mean than towards the extreme ends, basically. So one standard deviation out from the mean, you'll have about 68% of raw scores or people in that range. So that's already a majority of people. Majority of people are just, if
they're average.
Yeah,
like you'll most likely be average.
most people are average.
Which is true, yeah.
And as you go towards both extreme ends, the low end and the high end, you'll notice, on a bell curve distribution that, consistent with the shape, it gets lower and lower, basically, which means it's less and less scores. There's less and less people occurring at those extreme edges. Yeah. But it still happens, but it's just, you're not going to see it very often. You're not going to see it naturally occurring super often, but you can't see it. And it does happen. So that's not like totally out of the realm of possibility. I think that during those years, 2000 to 2014, 15 era, I think that what happened was a lot of the performers in powerlifting were usually probably within and I'm just arbitrarily throwing out this, but I think probably within 2 standard deviations, maybe not even all the way out to 2 standard deviations or just at that limit. But I think the really extreme ends, of human potential has only just started to come into the sport and actually really do some serious damage. And that's what we're seeing now. I mean, we've seen Ray Williams, do multiple squats over 1,000 pounds. And then, of course, myself, and this isn't a bragging point, but the world record total in the, 231 weight class is 1,974 pounds. When I competed at the winter record in November, I put up 2,095 pounds. So huge, huge difference. And at a very young age and, still able to, continuously develop and get stronger with many years ahead. And there's other 105 lifters, mostly in the United States, that have also surpassed that total. There's 2 others that have officially done it in competition. I think now we're really starting to get further out on that bell curve than we were before. But I think that people, just because of those formative years before these last, 5-6 years of competition, I think that people appraised human performance as actually being at about that 2 standard deviation out from the mean point, when in reality, there's more out there. And now that's becoming more and more apparent as powerlifting continues to get just a little more popular over time. Yeah. It's still not super popular or niche.
And that's, I think that is the key point that I think resonates with me the most is, in the end of the day, Ray Williams relative to human potential would you agree with this, is probably not a top 100 squatter. If every single American tried to compete in powerlifting, he would probably not be in the top 100, in my opinion. Would you agree with that? Most likely, just in terms of statistics, just probably not top 1,000. I mean, really possible. So it's one of those things where you get a glimpse of it, but it's a glimpse of it relative to the population in the sport, but then relative to the entire population of men, for example. Right. You really could get some, those 3 to 4 to 5 plus standard deviation people exist. Those are real humans.
They do.
Yeah. I think some people got a taste of that with Jesse Norris. Is you see, he almost seemed like an alien at the time, because you're like, he was a glimpse of a lifter who would be competitive probably 20 years from now, who was there at that time in that 2013, 2014 type of era. And you can definitely tell. And actually something that I just thought of now is what is interesting is, since he's no longer competing in powerlifting, I would say more people probably believe he's natural now than when he was competing. So I'd say now people, both the way he's built and the way his lifts are starting to seem a little bit more reasonable now that you're very, very close to his all-time good lifts points. Like you're within 0.4 or something like that by coefficient. And you did it, in stricter conditions. So, definitely could make the argument that your total's already more impressive. And then it makes, all of a sudden, then we have better context. Whereas it is funny that it's there was a time where I was considered not to be natural. And, because someone would see Omar, and then they would see me, and they'd see Alan Thrall, they'd see Silent Mike, they would see me, and then they would see Max Tuning, and I'd still be outlift all of them. But then when I'm compared to you, now I'm the small natty guy. So then now you're the freak now. And I wonder if we'll get to that point to where it's like, even for yourself, where then you'll see, there'll be some people who are that next wave, as long as, I would say as long as the population increases, which, I think we'll just have to see on that.
We will have to see if the sport can, continues to trend in the direction that it is now, and if that has in the last few years, there are going to be others that will come out. And there very well may be, someone in the next few years who shows up who, blows me out of the water. I mean, we don't know. Happen.
Yeah. And I think the thing that we both agree on is that genetics make a bigger difference than drug use. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Because based on the data I've seen, it's because isn't drug use is like around 12%, isn't it? Something like in the 10 to, I believe it's 10% if you equate for body mass. But then if you allow for weight classes to vary, then you could have realistically a huge increase in training effect. Like if you take drugs and you literally don't train, you do gain more muscle tissue than if you even train without drugs. So drugs alone are a huge factor relative to that person's baseline. But the person's baseline is where you have these drastic differences.
And I'm not entirely sure on the data of this, but there's also, I suspect that people also respond differently to the drugs. Like I think some people probably respond better than others. But even with that said, most people that are average, even with that, that advantage, probably still won't pass someone up who's 3 standard deviations out from the mean.
Yeah, and I think the thing that not a lot of people want to hear is more people compete in drug tested powerlifting by far. And the question becomes, and this is something I've had to really reconcile within myself, is do I believe Ray Williams is just that much better of a powerlifter than every untested powerlifter who's a super heavyweight? Does he just have genetics that would blow Andrei Milanichev out the water? You would have to believe that if you believe Ray Williams is, in fact, drug-free. And now I think yes. I think that is something I have concluded after, and especially after talking to more and more lifters. You do see a difference in athletic backgrounds, mentality. I do think it's possible. It is one of those things, though, that is tough, and I think it's good for people to see that we're not presenting this in just a black and white way.
Right, yeah. I'm certainly not going on record and saying, oh, well, we all have been drug testing. We've been doing it for years, so we're all good. That's not reality.
Actually, I have a question for you. Have you ever seen someone at a meet and thought, that guy doesn't look natural?
This is going to sound so funny. You might laugh. I think this was his first meet or one of his first meets. I saw Russell Orhi compete in 2000, I want to say like 2016 or 17 at like some meet in San Antonio, some collegiate meet. And when I first saw him, I was like, that guy's natural? I'm like, oh, goodness gracious.
That's so funny.
That was the only time I ever had that reaction at first. But then, as I got to know Russ and saw him more and stuff, I was like, that's went away very quickly.
So my question for you, before we send this off, back to the interview, now that we've thoroughly, I think, added some gray area here, is how strong would you be if you did use steroids? In your opinion, where do you think you could take it? Now, obviously, you can't fully answer that as far as like none of us can know for sure.
Right.
But how ridiculous do you think it could be? Because, in order for this to make sense, it must mean that then you could be even crazier.
Okay. So, to answer this question, like you said, we can't know for sure, but we'll make a couple of assumptions. We'll assume that I have, I'm not exactly sure what a typical response is, but whatever that is, there will be some increase in body mass, in musculature and muscle mass. And with that will definitely come, of course, an increase in strength. Yeah. So if I were to do something like that, I probably wouldn't do it for any longer than, maybe like 6 years, 5 years. I would try to probably definitely in competition, I would try to hit essentially my lifetime goals that I want to hit in the gym in competition, basically. So I would try to squat over 1,000 pounds raw in competition. I would try to deadlift over 1,000 pounds raw in competition. And I would try to bench press.
Wait, 1,000 pounds?
Yeah, 1,000 pounds on squat. And bench press, honestly, don't know how that would go. Probably high 500s.
And what body weight do you think, what weight class would you be if you just said, okay, I'm Ashton Rouska, I'm the best, arguably the most genetically gifted powerlifter. I'm going all in. Would you be 240s?
Yeah, 242.
Yeah.
I would probably cut down from like 260
Yeah.
and take advantage of the 24-hour weigh-in at that point.
Yeah. That'd be crazy. Well, that would be a fascinating thought. And yeah, I'm sure there'd be some people who'd want to see it, but to my knowledge, right, it will never happen.
No, thanks.
But yeah, I think that is good perspective, because I do think a lot of times there's this kind of false equivalence to all sides, to where it's like, hey, we don't know, but at the same time, I think sometimes people downplay the differences. Like, the only way this makes sense is if we do take the viewpoint that if these drug tested lifters are in fact drug tested, then they have to be that much more gifted. And yeah, I think this all adds up with those assumptions.
Yeah. I mean, basically, what I would try to accomplish is within the before or at like 30 years old is to try to total like 2,500 at 242, basically.
That would be insane. Yeah, I mean, that's to some extent. This is kind of like what we're seeing with John Hack, where it's like even Pete Rubish mentioned he did not know if John Hack was natural when he was competing in the IPF. Like, even though he's friends with him and was in a similar location, I think they trained at the same gym for a little while. But then afterwards, then he's like, okay, no, now I believe it, because he saw the gradual increase in that level.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
He got really good at it.
Yeah, hindsight's the 2020.
Tested, right, yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, that's all we needed here. Again, I want to reiterate, we're not saying drug tested means you're perfectly drug free. What we are saying, here's what I'll end this segment with something to consider for the audience, is if you're assuming Ashton for sure is not natural, because it's obvious. Look, he's so much bigger than Johnny. I've been lifting for 15 years, actually like 17 years now, which is crazy. But it's not just an apples to apples comparison with other people. And what I would invite you to do would be to just apply the same skepticism to your belief that Ashton isn't natural. That, do you know for sure he's not natural? We're not saying, okay, we can know. That's why I always title my videos drug tested. I can't for sure know Ashton's natural. Even despite my beliefs or knowing him as a person, I know that's a bias. So I'm very careful with my claims for a reason, just because that is the most intellectually honest way of communicating. Like, that's just the truth. You have to operate on what you know. So if you believe Ashton is for sure not natural, you have to operate on the fact that you do not know that he's not natural, for sure. We're all operating in probability. And I think that's something I really want to reiterate, because I see a lot of times the idea of casting doubt is almost in and of itself the grand point. But that is not the winning argument, just to cast doubt. It's what is the probability of this being true. And each position has a high burden of proof. So that's all I'd invite people to do, is that if you think it's impossible, to just consider the burden of proof to say, I know for sure that's not possible among all Americans who are lifting weights, or all humans who are lifting weights, since Ashton is literally the best in the world. Now, with that being said, the IPF's drug testing is pathetic. If you don't believe me, look at the 2019 doping list of nations and how many drug tests they have. Multiple nations have 0 drug tests. For example, Slovakia actually placed at Worlds, so they are a relevant country at Equipped Worlds, and they had 0 drug tests. They just didn't test, and somehow they're in the IPF. Secondly, actually the most surprising nation is Japan. Japan had 1 drug test in all of 2019, and they are a top 10 country when it comes to IPF Equipped Worlds. They're a top 6 country when it comes to open raw powerlifting, and they're top 5 when it comes to raw junior worlds. Yet, again, they had 1 drug test. So this isn't just picking economically disadvantaged or small countries. For example, Kazakhstan has 13 times the tests of Japan, with under 1/4 their GDP per capita. That is, of course, just due to the fact that Japan had 1, so Kazakhstan only needed 13. But that is just how low the drug testing is. In the United States, it's actually pretty good, with over 700 IPF tests, and then according to some other USAPL sources, they say it's 2,500 internally, and there's a conflict between the USAPL and the IPF in regards to if they can do those internal tests at local meets. So that's just to clarify that, yeah, not only is drug testing not equal drug-free, a lot of countries just aren't even drug tested. I'm shocked. For example, Iran is actually the funniest example within the IPF. They had 0 in-meat drug tests, and they had 3 out-of-meat drug tests. They had 3 positive drug tests. So just 3 for 3, 100% from the field. And somehow, I guess they're still in the IPF. I have no idea how. But anyways, to get to Ashton again, something that is interesting is actually Ashton was out-of-meat drug tested at a local meet in Maryland.
I knew a couple people going, so I went to go watch it, and I got randomly drug tested at that one. Yeah.
Wow, while watching.
Yeah, like just spectating.
So was it due to they knew about your lifting history and everything like that, and then they just decided on the spot to test you? That otherwise they did not plan that.
They didn't know I was going to the meet. I didn't announce it on social media. None of that. I just showed up just to watch, and they pulled me aside.
So I do think stuff like that carries a lot of weight when it comes to spontaneous out-of-meat drug tests. But I will say, to be as objective as possible, I asked Ashton if he's ever been blood tested, and the answer to that is no, only urinalysis. So I'll give credit to Canada for having the highest amount of blood tests out of all countries. And I do think that's a valid argument, that it needs to go in that direction to be up in there with the Olympic sports. I don't think powerlifting should be in the Olympics at all, personally. But just to have more effective drug testing. But, we'll see. But like I said, I think Ashton has made his case the best he possibly could, and it's just not in his control for anything beyond that. He's definitely open to the idea of blood tests, as I am. I think it would be a good idea. So let's get back to the interview in 3, 2, 1.
But, I can talk people off and say everything to them, but you just can't convince people sometimes. And, I've accepted that. And so to answer the second part of your question, at this point, after my 10 years of training now, my 7, 8 years of competing, it doesn't really bother me that much.
Mm-hmm. So I think you being, my personal opinion is the more people see of you, the more they kind of understand where you're coming from and just how phenomenal some people are genetically. Because like you said, you deadlifted 700 pounds at 17.
I was going to bring that up actually.
Yeah, go on that.
When I was a freshman in high school, I was already deadlifting over 500 pounds. And I was like a 130-pound kid at the time.
Yeah.
My sophomore year of high school, I hit 565 pounds at 160. My junior year, which is, when I started actually focusing on powerlifting, I hit 675 pounds. Wow. Yes, at 16 years old. Yep, in a Texas high school meet. And then my senior year of high school, when I was 17 years old, I hit 700 pounds, weighing about 190 pounds. Wow. And then even then, since then, by progression, my best deadlift so far is 870 pounds. And this is all on a, stiff bar. That's usually what I use. And the progress doesn't, it's been 11 years in the making. Yes, I started off, much stronger than many people. And I guess there were some areas, or periods where I got stronger faster than other periods. Yeah. And there were other periods, where I got injured or I had to really draw back for a very long time, and there was very minimal progress or gains. But I wouldn't say that there was any particular spike or thing that was out of the ordinary. Yeah. That someone would just look at and turn their head to or raise an eyebrow to.
So with your squat, what was the age you were at when you first squatted 600 pounds raw, by the way? Just out of my curiosity.
Ooh, I want to say...
in high school?
I don't think I was. I don't think I attempted it in high school.
That's the one that takes a little bit longer.
I don't think I attempted 600 in high school. I'm pretty sure I could have done it. I just didn't. I didn't attempt it raw. But I did hit 661 pounds at 19 years old.
Damn. 19. Yeah.
To it. All right, Jennifer, we've got the Ashton Rouska out of Texas, 19-year-old.
Oh, that looked easy.
Yeah, this guy's he's a prodigy.
Yeah. And I can see myself competing in untested meets as well in the future against some of those names like Yuri Belkin. If John Hack ever went up a weight class again, potentially him as well, and whoever else, it would be a great time. And for me, I go where the competition is. However, I would never use PEDs though.
Okay, even if you did that.
Yes, correct. Because all of my goals that I've set for lifting, I've wanted to attain naturally, and that's as simple as it gets. So, I've pretty much ingrained it, like into my head that I do not need any form of sort of special enhancement that will give me some competitive edge, whether I competed tested or untested.
Yeah.
And
So-
that I'm fully capable of achieving my goals naturally.
Yeah, so that goes perfectly into my next question, which is, what are your primary goals for this year, for 2021?
I want to be the first 105 to total 2100. I want to win nationals.
Yeah.
I want to be able to, if it's in the cards, barring everything else that happened with COVID and travel, if I can go to a world championship this year, I want to go and win, and I want to win so that way I can have a direct pipeline into the Sheffield. 2021, the goal is to set me up for the Sheffield, to win it.
Yeah. So now let me go on the other end of the spectrum here, but also can evoke very strong feelings in every lifter who's dealt with injuries. What was your worst injury you've ever had?
When I was 17 years old, and it was so weird because I went to the doctor, we went on base to the hospital at the time. Nothing out of the ordinary with x-rays, but I just had some severe back pain. And this actually happened not too long after that 700 deadlift. It wasn't because of this, that wasn't like the catalyst, but it happened sometime after that. And when this, injury occurred, it occurred at the same time as I had 2 or 3 other illnesses at the same time. I was very sick at that time. I had never been so sick in my life, and I've never gotten sick like that again, thankfully. But I would say that in particular was probably the worst for me because it took me from, this high school kid who could deadlift 700 pounds and bench press 405 pounds. And I was actually a good bench presser in high school, much better than I think I am now. And, I was squatting, well near 600 pounds. I was a very, very solid kid. And that all just went away, in the blink of an eye. When my first day back in the gym, when I got a bit better from being sick, I could barely squat 385 pounds. I didn't deadlift at all. Wow. And bench press, I just did I want to say 185 pounds for sets. And it took me a whole year actually to get back to the strength level that I was when I was 17 years old. I did another meet exactly a year later, and that's when I was able to deadlift 700 pounds again.
Wow. So expanding off of that, was there ever a time period when you considered quitting powerlifting?
Nope.
Never.
That's
awesome. Okay. Who do you see as your main competition in the next 3 to 5 years?
Rondele Hunt.
Rondele Hunt.
He is something else. Phenomenally strong. Mm-hmm. And there's explain to the viewers because most people watch my channel will have no idea who you're talking about. So
Rondele, really quickly,
right? Rondele Hunt is a powerlifter from Trinidad. The man is absolutely powerful. The man just recently squatted 800 pounds, weighing 239 pounds, without training squat for 8 weeks because he had hurt his knee or something like that. The man bench presses 550 pounds. Seen him do that. The man's deadlifted well over 800 pounds, I think 835 pounds. He's just a phenomenally strong athlete, progresses very well, works very hard, takes it very seriously, and he is just as hungry as I am.
So now for the last question on the second phase of questions is, what is your main goal for your career in powerlifting just overall? What are your main goals? Do you have written out specific total goals, numbers of world championships, or perhaps coefficient goals? But I would imagine most strong guys I talk to, they don't really focus on the coefficient as much as someone like myself who takes pride in the 500 Wilks. But what specifically are your primary goals that you need to kind of check off your bucket list?
So I actually have 0 coefficient.
Yeah, you have the highest good lift foot. You have the best coefficient in the world. And it's whatever.
I have absolutely 0 coefficient goals. For the longest time, my goal in powerlifting was to total 2,000 pounds. And so now that I've done that, I've had to readjust that. So I've readjusted it to 2,300. So that is the number to beat. And if I can beat that in my powerlifting career, great. That's what I'm going for. And my other goal is to squat or deadlift over 900 pounds in competition, and in the gym hit 1,000 pounds on either one of those lifts.
All right, so let's move on to the last section, percentage chance. This is the show where we ask you the percentage chance. Hence, percentage chance. Okay, let's go. Percentage chance that you deadlift 1,000 pounds. Under any condition, like you said, it's a goal. What percentage chance would you give yourself that?
100.
100%. All right. I love the confidence. What's the percentage chance that you squat 900 pounds?
900?
Yeah.
100.
100%. All right. What's the percentage chance that you bench press 500 pounds in competition?
In comp?
Yes.
80.
80%. All right. What's the percentage chance that you compete in 5 or more IPF Worlds starting now?
50.
What's the percentage chance that you compete outside of the 93 or 105 kilogram weight class?
75.
Okay, what's the percentage chance that you compete in the 83 kilogram division ever?
Ever again?
Ever again, yeah, because you have, for those who don't know, you have in the past, and you can really manipulate your weight very well. So what's the chance that you cut down all the way to 183 ever again? And this is over the next multiple decades.
65, 70.
65. All right. Damn, Russ better watch out. Okay, what's the percentage chance that you compete in strongman at any point in time?
30.
30%?
No, 25.
25? That's still decent. Yeah, John.
It's there, but it's unlikely.
Yeah. So what's the percentage chance that you're competing in powerlifting after the age of 50?
30.
Now, this is the final one. What is the percentage chance that you consider yourself to be the greatest of all time after it's said and done by your own standards? And extending off of that, if there is, or if there are caveats, is there a threshold where you'd feel comfortable saying that?
If I can total 2,300 pounds naturally, weighing sub 240, 230, and nobody else can do it, then I would be comfortable saying it. And for me to achieve that, I would say we're looking at 70%.
Awesome. All right, well, that's it. That's the whole interview. Thank you again for being on. Ashton Rouska, you are the first guest in this series, and you are objectively the best.